come on. Hey, feel the rhythm. It's getting from the deepest of your soul. Now, use your senses, and everything will be easier than before. Keep on moving, funk is coming. Blind yourself, big. You'll become the star in this die. Spread your wings, fly to me. Funk is coming.
Okay, so we are here this evening with Scott, Gone Rogue. I mean, you've changed nicks every fortnight, because that wasn't your nick on G Plus, isn't it?
Oh, no, I just went by my normal name.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. Yeah, so
Yeah, no, I switched to a handle once we got off of Google Plus.
is there a website where you can keep track of your nicks, or have you got?
Not really, no.
Yeah. Okay.
Rogue is the most common one I use these days.
Uh-huh.
Or something with Trash Panda in it, because I'm a fan of the little.
Oh yeah, sure, yeah. The Trash Panda is another one. Yeah, I forgot about that. Right. Yeah, there is that too. So we've been knowing each other from the G Plus days, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And you were pretty active. I mean, I would say you were hyperactive, like, you know, but you were there.
Right, no, I was in there. I popped into Nadia Hangouts from time to time. Pissed off a lot of fundies when I did that. I was too nice, I guess. I don't know. They got weird about that. But, you know, I popped into Nadia's Hangouts from time to time. Gus and I used to do a lot of Hangouts together, and you were in a fair number of them.
Yeah.
I'll admit, one of the things that also kind of wound back my time is I found more and more of those late nights took their toll on me, so I just couldn't hang.
It's funny you say that, because this one is gonna go right after Gus, so that's a good segue. Yeah. I just spoke with him a couple of days ago. So yeah, I mean, the good thing about Nadia Hangouts were that they were lasting 24 hours, so everybody had the chance to actually go there at night, depending on their time zone. So basically everybody was trashed in one way or the other, right?
Oh yeah, no, the Nadia Hangouts were quite a time.
What?
And then you had some people who just kept bizarro hours, so it's like, no, you live in the same time zone I do, but you're here at 3 a.m.
Yeah. So what is your best recollection of, you know, of those hangouts, those, you know, meetings?
Oftentimes a staging ground for a lot of people to rant at each other.
Mm-hmm.
And also there was the sort of Nadia hug box portion.
But
where you get like Rev and Fud Mutton and folks that would just try to cheer Nadia up.
So
which was a monumental task.
Well, yeah. What was the thing which drove you mostly to those hangouts? Was it the arguments? Was it the person? Was it the conversation in general? What was the? I mean, what was the magnet? You know that.
So, if I remember correctly, I first learned about Nadia's Hangouts. I want to say somehow I went from Armored Skeptic, back when he was still doing theological stuff, and somehow the Google algorithm brought me to JD Kane's channel.
Okay.
And Talking Shit Tuesday, which, I mean, I do believe there was some crossovers where they would be talking about the same fundy, and I think that was kind of how the algorithm got me there. And then as I started seeing JD Kane's Hangouts, that started bringing me to, like, look at Nadia Hangouts, and it's like, oh, okay. This is, like, interesting stuff, and it's all this conversation that, like, I've been watching so much content on, and I wanted to get into the discussion, and Nadia's Hangouts were kind of the the easiest entry point.
Mm-hmm.
And,
So
I mean, from there, I ended up on like TST a few times here and there, and like I kind of commingled my way into the community.
right, but so what was it I would say the quality of the persons, and I put big thing over there because quality, yeah, right. I mean, can be anything, so quality is pretty neutral. Was it the quality of the persons or the quality of the conversation?
Uh, I think that the conversations were more what drew me than like any particular person being very magnetic. Like, I mean, I got on with Nadia well enough, but like it really boiled down to is that they were hosting an open venue
Mm-hmm.
where people could have these discussions, and I liked the whole spirit of that and liked being a part of it. Because I have a lot of things to say, and I like when there are people there to actually listen to me say it.
Okay, this is something quite interesting because I had a conversation not too long ago with Matthew, and I'm not referring to the video, something else that Matthew Steele, and I was telling him that since I started doing this thing, I've had some difficulties in actually having people show up. And I'm not talking about, I mean, there are some people which are more shy than the others, stuff like that you got to push. And I understand that. But actually, I found, people which were really active during the day, and even now they're fair active, they don't want to come in. And that struck me because, when I started doing that, I thought, okay, this will be the last of my problems because this is people which used to go, on air and speak and talk, right? And
Yeah.
apparently there is a void now. Nobody does that anymore.
No, I mean, other than the
But
occasional TNT,
yeah, but even
that's like,
even the oldies, you know what I mean? So what do you think about that? Why is that? Is it because the conversation is stale? Because the people are bored? Because I mean, I do not understand that.
I mean, honestly, part of me thinks that there's some. I think some of it could also be that the way that whole community ended was particularly unpleasant for a lot of people. And I think that maybe there's this feeling of not wanting to kind of revisit all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Like I know, like I mean, I was thankfully on the fringe of things, but just a new religion came into town in the GDC that kind of completely changed the map, and that religion was politics. Like it just ripped whole groups apart and kind of rearranged the whole map.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're referring to that was while the GD, the Google Plus thing was still on, and I think
Yeah.
that coincide, roughly with the Brexit era. I mean, I think that was
Brexit definitely initiated it,
yeah.
and then the Trump 2016 election just sort of pitched it whole hog.
Yeah. So, do you think that because you remember there were some people, and me included, that would say, listen, it's weird to call this a community. It's weird. Be careful. There were a lot of people which invested a lot personally, and think that there were a bunch of friends, and some of them are. Don't get me wrong, but some people, they really thought that everybody was a friend. And and some people, they were really cautious about that, saying, yeah, that's not really the case, just be careful. So do you think that some of them just got burned by that? They didn't realize that?
Yeah, no, I do think some people got burned by that when they realized that the tenuousness of these relationships that they thought were stronger bonds. I mean, I can say I fell out with some people that I never expected to, but they just seemed to lose their minds.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a habit of speaking mind, and I don't draw lines, but I'm also not going to just rubber stamp whatever you say because I don't want to rock the boat. If I disagree with something, I'm going to say so. And a lot of people took that as a personal attack, but they got quite mad at me.
And that's an advantage that believers, specifically Christians, had always had compared, to people which doesn't believe, isn't it? Because it seemed to me that okay, we can make fun of them, some of them, for some, but they are way more able to corral, they get through rough spots, but then they have a way to get back together, even if they've got really they believe in different flavors of gods.
Yeah, no, there's a foundation there to encourage them to kind of settle things.
Mm-hmm.
I won't argue with that. Whereas on the non-theist side of the corner, there was really no such thing.
Yeah.
And in fact, some people took the opportunity to just try to drive the wedge more and more.
Uh-huh. So, talking about these people, and especially the fundies, which, they're really, really fun. I remember there was a time, and that's something I want to talk with you, mostly because of the background that you have, in your line of work and stuff like that. There was a time, a phase. Let's call it a phase, because we went through phases, in the.
Oh, definitely.
There was that phase, and I'm sure you remember, about the DNA is a code thing.
Oh.
Yes. See? Because, listen, man, I know it doesn't show, but I prepare myself, when I speak with people, and I have notes, on all of it. So that's something that I wanted to talk with you, mostly, again, because of your background. So what is your recollection, of that phase, and what are your thoughts about that?
So I remember, essentially, the creationists were putting forward this argument that DNA is code and therefore evidence of intelligent design.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is that they didn't understand what code is well enough to realize that it's all just an analogy to help lay people understand the basics. It's not really, it's like a lot of analogies. The closer you hone in on it, the more wrong it is. Even if you were to go down to the most fundamental level, since the first problem that they can't really talk about is that they don't understand the difference between code and a compiler and what that means. So already the metaphor starts getting tricky, and then you try to explain what a compiler is to them, and they talk about the thing that actually builds off the DNA, and it's no, that's not really it.
Mm-hmm. So what did you say were the weak points of of this analysis? Because they pushed it really, really hard. They basically said, it's code because it's a language, it's a set of instructions that help the cell to replicate and replicate in such a way according to all the instructions which are contained that they really pushed the analogy that at the point where it wasn't even anymore an analogy, it was code. So
right.
Again, what are the weak points, in your opinion about that? And I mean, just talk us through, a little bit about, why the analogy is weak, why the analogy might, be not so shitty.
Okay, as in terms of as an analogy that is providing a map to understand the territory, it's quite helpful. But they're taking the model that we've put onto DNA so that we can understand it
Mm-hmm.
and codify it. Because in reality, DNA cells aren't marked with letters indicating what fucking type they are. And the fact is that DNA can often do things that are unpredictable in certain circumstances. So all this model is just there to simplify our ability to grasp the subject. And they're taking that to mean that, no, that literally is how DNA works, which means that someone had to write that code, which means that there had to be an intelligent designer.
Right.
And also, they completely overlook the fact that there are entire fields and these of metaprogramming where you actually have code that kind of writes itself. And in fact, we're finding that that kind of thing is the closest that we're getting to resembling human mind patterns, is by letting code that is able to write itself with things like neural networks. So their entire theory is asked backwards, and they're taking they're taking a loose grasp of one subject and placing it over a loose grasp of another subject and saying that, no, these two things are the same.
Mm-hmm. So if you were to explain to somebody which is not professionally proficient, in writing code and knowing what code is, if you were to bring it down to its core, what would be your biggest objections to that kind of argument, in the specifics of what basically why DNA is not a language and why the double helix is not code. If you were just to shrink it down, in simple terms, and take your time. I mean, it goes. Sorry, and the reason I'm asking you this is because I remember there were some some hangouts, but mostly they were on the biology side. I don't think that anybody really addressed the information side that is contained in the analogy, and I just wanted years late, I just wanted to have this kind of topic addressed.
Trying to think of how to break this analogy apart.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the first problem you run into with the analogy is that source code can actually represent different things in terms of what they do. Like Python source code, in terms of what it's used for, is very different than, say, C language source code. Python source code is actually, I think, closer to what they imagine DNA to be like, where it is just a set of instructions that a system comes through and executes those instructions.
Right.
And does the work defined by that language. Whereas in C, you've got a compiler that transforms. And I mean, Python does too, which is kind of doing it all real time. The C language is used to define a specification that creates a binary that can then be used for execution over and over and over and over and over again. So while it does build this object, it's not self-building. You could inject a different compiler and you would end up building something different.
Yeah.
Not completely different, unless you just design something that interprets C commands in a completely different way, but that would just be weird.
Right. So, and again, another thing which pops in my mind, usually when you write code, and again, there is another problem here, because when the conversation was going on, I think there was a lot of confusion between code, like, a code, and code as in a program written in a specific language. That was another area of confusion where they thrived in. So
the difference between a binary and source code.
Yeah, but also a simple code like letter substitution. Like literally information, right? As opposed to a language. I would say that, first of all, the main problem with the language analogy is that if you have a program written in a language and you run the program, you expect the result to be the same within the parameters that are given, right?
Right.
Well, we know that doesn't happen with DNA replication, so...
Right, DNA can replicate irregularly. I guess if you wanted to put it in philosophy terms, source code is no different from any other analytical system.
Mm-hmm.
It's a system we define. It's no different than math. A lot of uneducated theists put a lot of magic into math. And it's like, no, this is a rule set we came up with to try to model things. It's not magic.
Right.
It's like people who talk about weird things like God existing having to do with 2 + 2 = 5, and it's like, why would a deity existing ever have an impact on that? We defined what 2 represents and what 2 represents and what addition means. It's an analytic system.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all source code is an analytic system that defines a way of creating instructions and defining data structures. Like, if anything, DNA is closer to like a markup language than it is a programming language.
Yes.
It defines a structure that then something can use as a map to build.
Right.
And in this case, it almost works, because when you go from browser to browser, you get some different results.
You get different results because it is interpreted in a different way.
Correct.
But the
and
code,
there's
but the problem is that the code doesn't change. While
right,
with
whereas, that's true.
Yeah.
Whereas DNA can outright change by
Yeah.
a bad duplication.
and that, I think, is the nail in the coffin. If we talk about DNA as a language, is the fact that it is not formalized. It's not unequivocal. The instructions that they, one of the characteristics of the programming languages is that they must not be ambiguous, and they have got to be formalized, and that is something which it doesn't happen in the DNA, and the reason is because
spec.
Right, and the reason is because when you split it, you don't have the same results every time. So it's either not formalized or the interpreter is really shitty. So
Right. There's no compiler or interpreter saying you can't do this with DNA.
yeah,
It's gonna roll with whatever you give it, and you could end up with like, your face ain't quite so right.
yeah, it's really funny. I think they would have way more success if they said that that DNA is a natural language. Because
A natural language, a data format.
yeah, no, but I'm talking about a natural language like English or German or Italian.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The analogy there would be better because in a natural language, you have interpretation. So
Right, and languages evolve.
yeah, right? Yeah. Yeah. I always thought about that and said, I can't say that because I don't want to give them ideas.
Right, because they will run any metaphor you give them
Yeah.
just into the ground
Yes.
and demand that you accept it as hard fact. And it's like, oh yeah, these are abstractions that we are creating to help us understand something that's kind of unpredictable, but has some predictable behavior to it.
Right. Yeah. They will literally run everything that you get to a point where birds apparently they got like they work as rockets or yeah, you remember that too, right? Yeah.
It's not about expelling air.
Yeah, from
propulsion.
from the anus. It was like a jet engine, literally a jet engine. But
I hate to say that does sound like something that they would float around as like a fact.
well,
But they wouldn't.
birds have got an intake, an exhaust port. So yeah,
There's certainly air moving through them. I won't argue with that.
yeah. Anyway, so were there any other things which strike you as funny, and if you thought about the arguments and where you were coming from? Like for example, people every so often they talk a lot about logic, and logical structures and stuff like that. So is there anything that you recall that really, made you think, okay, fuck it, right? Because that's super wrong.
It wasn't so much in the GDC days, but there's been some the debate of what atheism is.
Mm-hmm.
Where they've attempted to boil it down to like a two-pronged syllogism in logic, and it's like, I don't know how to explain to you that this doesn't represent all possible positions by any stretch of the imagination.
Right.
And it's so narrow and so pointless that it just like really anyone who would bicker about the definition of atheism and attempt to bring it into syllogisms, it's like, why you got to do this? It doesn't make anything more clear.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I understand. It made me wonder, when you had this kind of conversation, it made me wonder, okay, is there anything that you say that is going to add up to the conversation? So what is the value that is going to add to the conversation?
Right. At best, you're going to present this like stilted definition that a lot of people are going to look at and say, well, that's not what I mean.
Uh-huh.
And what do you have at that point?
Right.
It's like a whole big predictive model that just ignores, most of the possible inputs.
Yeah, talking about analogies, the analogy I was making in my mind when I've heard this conversation is like, okay, it's like spending 20 years learning a language, right, and actually never using it. Like, it's 20 years learning, not even Klingon, because, somebody speaks Klingon, right? I mean, but, defining a language, and studying a language and then not using it with anybody. It's, yeah.
Right.
You build...
Doing the equivalent of like a FizzBuzz application here and there and just never actually putting it to any practical use. And it's very easy to work yourself into this point where, like, you're in your own bubble and you think you've just mastered it all.
Mm-hmm.
Because you've never actually had to put it to the test and put it into a real environment. This is where, like, the philosophy guys are like, oh, you do programming, you know Boolean algebra. I'm like, I do know Boolean algebra, but when I'm writing Boolean statements in programming, it's way more concrete than the shit you're talking about.
Right.
Like, I'm comparing actual data against, like, hard criteria here.
Mm-hmm.
And it has to match this or that. And there's cases where I just throw an error and say, this data doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Whereas their syllogisms oftentimes don't leave any room for invalid input.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah. There is a. I think one of the problems is that there is a overuse of binary logic in these conversations.
yes,
While
dichotomies.
yeah, while and that I think it is a problem. I mean, I understand it is useful if you have to talk about a dichotomy which might happen, or or an argument that you might have. But the moment that you try to put it in real life, I think that things like Bayesian or fuzzy logic would be way more helpful to interact with people.
Yeah, I mean, real life is far more probabilistic than it is either or.
Yeah.
There's a suite of potential outcomes.
Uh-huh.
None of this, and part of the problem is that you have a lot of people who, they hyperinflate the significance of their philosophical argument.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yes, you've constructed this argument in this set of analytical assumptions that comes to an inevitable conclusion, but it's just existing in a vacuum. And there's a lot of scenarios that you would try to put this model against, and it's just going to go, none of it doesn't fit.
Mm-hmm.
And you either end up, so it's like understanding that those abstractions are there to simplify a discussion, and that as soon as you're going into a more complex discussion, that model may no longer be useful. It's kind of like when you have a multiplication table and suddenly you're dealing with decimals, and it's like, okay. Just because I've got this nice convenient slide rule chart here to get me through 1 through 12, it actually isn't all that helpful anymore.
Right. Yeah, I think there is sometimes there is really a lack of understanding of how things work. I mean, even if you think about stuff that you have in your car, your ECU, in order to make your ABS work, it has to rely on fuzzy logic. So they start from an analytical point of view, but then because of they've got interaction with real world and analog systems, you got to go that extra step. And to me,
right, when you're dealing with road conditions that are almost utterly random,
yeah,
you've got to have a system that's going to be flexible.
Yeah, and to me, I don't know about you because we have a similar professional background. To me, that is one of the things which has always fascinated me. So we deal with digital system, and most of the time, in order for us to make them work in the real world, we have to emulate an analog behavior. And on the other side, I've listened to conversations which are, they're analog, right? I mean, yeah, do you believe in something? It's kind of an analog because, certainty, stuff like that. And they want to transfer everything into digital. It's, the inverse process. That has always fascinated and puzzled me, to be fair.
Yeah, and I mean, I started off as an electrical engineer and then moved over to computer engineering. So I'm acutely aware of just how drastically you're changing the incoming information when you flip between those two.
Yeah.
And you're exactly right. And I mean, I think there are some technological evangelists who keep saying that right around the corner, we're going to finally, get rid of that veil between digital and analog, or at least hit a resolution where we can't tell the difference anymore. But it's still not there.
Yeah.
I support a lot of IT systems that are fairly recent, and I'll tell you that a lot of it hinges on people actually doing what they're supposed to do. And it all comes crashing down if they don't.
Yeah. Okay, Scott, listen, we are at the end of our conversation. We are now at the point where I ask you the 3 questions that I asked you to send me. Yeah, I don't know, it was a struggle, but that's part of the game. So, yeah. I mean,
they were kind of tough to think of. I'm not good at that kind of thing.
Yeah, okay, yeah, it's fair enough. Fair enough. I mean, it's an exercise. So, okay, I'll start with the first one. The first one is, what do you think lead to the collapse of the old Great Debate communities?
So I would say the first wedge came, as I kind of alluded to earlier, politics. Politics suddenly dominated the discussion and kind of completely redrew the lines of who associated with who, to an extent that was really weird to see as someone who was not terribly politically inclined at the time. It was interesting to watch people that up until that point I had regarded as very rational, reasonable people just fly off the deep end. And the second kind of nail in the coffin came from turf war.
Okay, turf war.
Someone. I mean, effectively, there was an attempt to centralize the Great Debate community, and it was not necessarily well received, and then went through several fits and kind of scattered us all to the 4 winds. And with the death of G+, everyone kind of went to their respective Discord servers and decided to, just let it all lie.
Okay, fair enough.
I feel like I'm being diplomatic.
Oh, fuck me. I mean, you were skating on really thin ice, and I really appreciate that. You were super careful. Turf war. Fuck off. Second, yeah. Come on, really. So the second question, yeah, but really, I appreciate that. The second question is, what do you not miss from the Great Debate community days?
I do not miss the grandstanding. I do not miss the people who would come into a hangout to sit there and try to browbeat you with their, half-baked philosophy. I don't, I'll admit, I can't watch someone like G-Man like his entire demeanor just irritates me the entire time I'm watching, which is why I watch Dragnot's content. I like having a filter between me and the locals, because like I can listen to him for like 5 minutes and it's like, no, I can't take this. This is too stupid.
Okay, so the third and final question. What are the big problems you see emerging within the technology field right now?
Cults of personality are rising up big time, especially around, I would say, the crypto sphere right now. Is a particularly toxic element coming into technology, mostly built on hype and people not understanding what a zero-sum game is. So I would say it's, and that really is just sort of a symptom of the fact that there's this kind of growing segment of what I would call techno bros who think that I've mastered how to do a complex programming thing, so I'm equipped to solve everyone else's problems. How hard can banking be? I've got this. We can do it all in code.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the opposite of really how I've approached being tech savvy. It's my job to extract expertise from the actual experts in the field and help them get solutions to their problems, not figure the problems out for them and hand them a solution and tell them that this is going to fix everything.
Do you think that the fact that there is a lot of amateurs in our field is part of the problem, or it's a byproduct of that attitude that you just described?
I can't even necessarily say I can blame it on amateurs per se, but I will say that
No. I'm not saying that thing has got to be blamed by amateurs. I'm saying, that there is a lot of amateurs in our field, and I was wondering if these people are, because of what you just said, the techno fancy people.
Oh yes.
Or
yeah, no, the techno evangelists have drawn in this amateur crowd who knows a little bit, but not enough to be able to understand the problems with the systems they're being shown.
Mm-hmm.
Like the fact that they think that a fully publicly visible database is a solution to every field and every industry is shocking in its ignorance. To a point where these like amateur tech pros are just so taken up by these very like high in the sky big ideas, but they don't have any. They've never done any real application work. They've never seen what it actually takes to get a computer-based system to actually enable a process, and what that should look like. And so they've been brought in, they've kind of been drawn into tech on this idea that they're going to make it big in crypto.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. Okay, Scott, really, super interesting, super funny. So yeah, I think this went really well. Because I'm glad, because it's not a secret, you were a little bit worried. I don't know what to say. I mean, I guess it went well. We touched something which I think was really interesting, not touched by anybody, and I think that you provided a point of view which is not that common. You know what I mean? The angle that you approach some problem is not something that was really widespread or as spoken in such an exhaustive way. So yeah. No, I'm dead serious, man. Yeah.
No, I appreciate that. I just do know I can ramble on.
Okay, yeah, and that's why we're gonna stop right now, because people got the attention span of a goldfish, and we got to stop. Okay, so cheers, man. Thank you again, and have a good time. Ciao, ciao.
Thanks, Fabio. Take care.
If I didn't care more than words can say, if I didn't care, would I feel this way?